if everybody's not comfortable with that, just letting you all know. So here I'm going to go into a little bit more of the medium itself. And I guess before we start talking about ice, I want to talk about, let's define it, if you will, because people are going to be using ice interchangeably with two different mediums. And I'd like to start with what this course is focusing in on, and it's really alpine ice. And this is the ice that's on the glaciers. It's steep snow or hardened snow, compacted snow. It's basically all that snowfall glacier that just forms over time, pressure through the freeze-thaw cycles, and it's in the mountains. We find it in the couloirs, we find it on the big glacier head walls, but it's out in the mountains. And part of alpine ice is, well, how do I tell what's alpine ice? Like, because alpine ice really can be derived from hard snow. So we'll use hard snow and alpine ice somewhat interchangeably because the skill sets pretty much are the same for both. And I want to distinguish this from water ice. So water ice is, all the cool Will-Gad photos of, climbing waterfalls. This is, while the techniques that you are going to be shown for alpine ice carry over to water ice, there are some differences and different techniques that are involved. So think of alpine ice, this course, as a good primer if you want to explore this medium, but water ice is basically liquid water that freezes compared to snow that compacts itself over time. And that really is the main distinction. And, as I mentioned, if it looks like a waterfall, that's a very gross way of maybe thinking about it, in terms of like water that just freezes up versus develops over time. And the thing about water ice, it's usually harder, steeper, and it's a little bit more brittle than alpine ice, though they do share some of the same common traits. So again, we're going to kind of put on our hats for alpine ice for this course. And throughout the lecture, I've taken photographs of various alpine ice climbs to kind of get you a feel for some of the steepness and some of the terrain, and it's really quite varied throughout. So if you have any questions about maybe some of the photos, feel free to ask. But I want to go into, when we talk about ice, I want to let's have like a common language, if you will. And as we talked about, ice is formed from the water freezing, and and if everybody can mute themselves, that would be great. But when we talk about ice, we're also thinking about how we're going to talk about it in terms of its opaqueness. And when we talk about opaqueness, we're talking about how soft the ice is. So if you have can everybody mute themselves?
So Julianne, I think we're getting a lot of feedback from your mic, it looks like.
I think she just muted herself.
Okay, cool.
Good, thanks. So when we talk about opaqueness, this is really like how much can you see through it? And if it's kind of cloudy-ish, it usually denotes itself as being a little bit more soft. And softness is not a bad thing, because if you want the ice sometimes to be a little soft, so you plant really good. When you put your pick into the snow, it sticks, it's a bomber hold, and you could move on. If it's too opaque, then it just falls off. So it's you're going to kind of hear this. It's going to be, it's a fickle medium, but when we talk about opaqueness, we want to think about how soft or hard the ice is. And when we talk about color, think about color as how hard the ice is. So, if you look at on your glacier climbs, when you looked at the blue ice on some of the glaciers, I mean, you're really seeing sort of the ice in the most pure way. All the air has been just driven out, and it's really as pure, frozen, compressed, pressurized water as you could possibly get, compared to black ice, which has gone through various freeze thaw cycles. There's some maybe some pebbles and dirt that gets mixed into it. So if you think about when you're putting your pick into really nice pure ice, it's really the pick and the medium. In black ice, you potentially have the you could be dulling your tools, or maybe you won't get a good stick. So think of this as it's hardness, but it's also maybe how well the ice is going to take your tool. And clarity, we want to think about this, like how clear can I actually see through this? And that really speaks to how brittle it might be. If you have ice that is not very clear, it lends itself to being a little bit more soft. And when you hit it with a tool, it could fracture itself from the harder ice, which might be lying 2 or 3 inches below. And if we start seeing cracks, fissures on the ice as we're kind of moving through it, be very suspect of that, because it means that there's a potential weakness. And the weakness could be maybe within the top 3 to 4 inches because of its being sun affected, or it could be worse and it could be much deeper, which talks about the stability of what you're going to be walking in onto. And there's a term called dinner plates. And so this is portions of the ice that, is fairly opaque. And as you hit it with your tool, it basically comes off in round forms, almost like concave. I mean, it literally looks like dinner plates. And this is usually a function of temperatures changing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about safety aspects of ice climbing. But when you start getting dinner plates, you should start thinking, okay, what's changing around me? Temperatures are changing. And it just makes not only a situation a little bit more tenuous for you, because you can't get the tool to stick, but it's also your partner who's down below who's going to get rained on by those items. Any questions on maybe just some of the terms? And I'll describe a little bit more of the situations as we kind of review those a little bit later. Okay, so ice climbing is inherently dangerous. It's probably a little bit more dangerous than climbing glaciers or rock climbing. There's really very little margin for error. So we need to be diligent. This is a medium that really requires an apprentice period, if you will. We don't go all out. When we want to ease into this type of climbing and ease into the medium. The rewards are great because you're going to be given a set of skills that could be transferred to your glacier climbs. There's a little bit of rock skill that could be brought into this. And then there's actually the ice climbing itself. You're transferring over to water ice. So it is a very rewarding medium, but there's some things that we need to pay attention to. So the first one is we want to, these are usually we're going to find ice in the Northwest, mostly in couloirs, or maybe underneath some areas with rock above. So we got to watch out for the usual crevasses, hidden ice, loose rock. Be aware of what's above and around you. And as just like on glaciers, as temperatures warm, sometimes ice falls and rock falls. So we want to be conscious of the terrain, and that is something to be aware of. Depending upon the season that you do some of these climbs, there's avalanche conditions that could come into play. There's also weather conditions, and this is sort of, I'm not lumping this together with avalanche, but you want to pay attention to the weather even in the middle of the summer, because that could speak a lot to the quality of the ice that you would be climbing. So there's hazards that are outside of, I just kind of went over some of the hazards maybe if that might be on the route, but there's hazards that you could each control yourself. And I would encourage you to do what you can to mitigate these so that you're really just dealing with the hazards that come with the route. And the first is loose clothing. A lot of our climbing clothing is tailored and pretty tight. And that's for a reason. We are going to be essentially wearing 12 knives on our feet, and we're going to have 2 very sharp tools in our hands. And anything that hangs down or it's loose, something that's susceptible to being caught by any one of those points could make you trip, and you're not going to rest yourself on an ice pitch. So loose clothing, you want to button everything up as best as possible. You want to avoid inappropriately racked gear. You should not have anything hanging below your buttocks on your rack, say on your harness. I've known people who have walked across glaciers, had runners tied that have hung mid-thigh, and they've caught crampon points and shattered ankles. So it is a real thing. So keep your gear tight, keep your gear high away from your feet as best as possible, and always be aware of where your tools are. And the sharpness of your tools is a hazard you can control. A dull tip will not stick, and it could cost you time, or worse, you may find that your crampon points, for example, if they're dull, may not be able to stick in some really hard or brittle ice that you need to move through. So keeping things sharp is something you control. And poor crampon technique or travel technique. In the first field trip, we're going to go over footwork a lot. And it's really, really important. I mean, we climb rock with our feet, same thing with ice climbing. And, your crampons are your connection to the ice, and making sure that all 12 of those points are connected to the ice is paramount. So fatigue, don't push yourself if you're tired, or keep yourself in shape for this so that you can move fast. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. This is a medium where slips and falls really have consequences, even small little 10-foot slides. It's not soft like snow, and you could really seriously hurt yourself. So think of this area as no fall zones. And the timing of your attempt. You want to choose the right time to climb the route that you're considering. You want to pay attention to the weather, and you want to think about what it's going to do to the ice. What's the aspect that your ice that is facing, and what's the timing that you'll be through the route, all of those things that we would normally take for our glacier climbs. So here's a picture of the north side. It's the Adams Glacier on Mount Adams, and it is considered an alpine ice climb. and this is an interactive portion. So the route generally goes up like this. The route has been changing over each year, but that's generally the route. Can some people throw out what objective hazards we might find on this route? So this is a picture facing south, probably about 8 a.m.
Well, if that's south-facing, I mean, you definitely got a big rock wall up there with a lot of ice on it. So as it heats up, rock fall is a hazard as well as ice fall.
Correct. So we have some potential rock fall, above that upper third section. Anything else, Pete, that stands out at people?
Got another, but I'll give someone else an opportunity.
It looks a little corniced at the top as well, so avalanche potential.
Potentially avalanche potential, depending upon the time of year. Absolutely. Anyone else?
All right, I'll go again, crevasse fall.
Crevasse fall, yes. So here's just some of the objective hazards. We have the orientation to the sun, as I said. This route, even though it's a north-facing aspect, for some reason it catches sun very early on, and the general thinking is to be past this section before 6 a.m. so that you don't get rained on by the loosening rock from the rock fall that's above here. There's obviously crevasses and steps that you have to surmount. You obviously don't want to travel into this area where we have seracs, which are essentially ice blocks that are detached from the main part of the glacier. So this side is kind of not desirable. And your slips and falls, we have some pretty big moats that go all around all of this. So, and at the top, this is sort of the classic problem for this route, is the Bergschrund, which has been opening up earlier and bigger each year as we have some global warming happening. So in some years, it's not even passable. So knowing the timing of the route, not only in terms of during the day, but the time of the year, and then, kind of just getting the weather so that you're going to be on this thing. Again, all things to kind of mitigate when you start thinking about these routes. And we want to think about these routes in terms of the conditions. And, we want to pay attention, we plan a lot of our climbs, months or weeks out, but we want to pay attention to the cold and warm cycles that some of these areas are going through. That will lead itself to either, we don't want to go out in ice conditions if it's been warm for a full week. We really want colder conditions where it's going to be more, below freezing. So we want to pay attention to what's the aspect, what's the elevation of the route, portion of the route that we want to climb. There's also the amount of cloud cover that has seen. Obviously, if we have clouds for an extended period of time, it generally keeps temperatures warmer. Cold, clear nights are really good because all the heat, dissipates up into the atmosphere. So, we want to pay attention to those types of things. Aspect we were just talking a little bit about, when does the sun hit this slope? Storm cycles, how much, if it's early season, how much snow has the route seen, or conversely, how much warming and meltout has actually happened. We talked a little bit about avalanche conditions, particularly if early season, and which comes down to the timing of the trip. A lot of our alpine ice climbs are really historically have start coming into play, say July, definitely by August and in September. We want the snow to be melted off of the glacier ice so that we could go up some of these routes. That said, I was on Rainier in May, and it looked like beginning of July conditions on the mountain. So while I hate to throw out some months, things are changing, and we just gotta kind of muddle through this now as our particularly as we're in this heat dome right now. We just got to watch. We're not going to be able to rely on the guidebooks as we have in the past. Safety and speed. This is a medium where speed and efficiency is safe. We want to get through the climbing portion, the steep climbing ice portions in the coldest part of the evening or day in order to mitigate the conditions, and being able to kind of move quickly through those areas and not dally means you have less rock fall, ice fall as temperatures start to warm coming on you. And I encourage everybody to take the mantra that time is against you. I know it's kind of like a Matrix reference, but it really is. When you start on a route, you really need to keep to a pace to continue to move through the sections that you want. If you go too late through a critical section, it could, things could just happen. And, as I mentioned, little forgiveness for error. And as the conditions start to warm and maybe you're not working through certain areas as fast as you would, it just opens up the potential for either injury or for other things to happen to your trip, which makes route finding very important. And these are, we all go on routes that we haven't been on before. And, sometimes we rely on others to maybe know more of the details, but this medium more than any other, we really need to know the route as best as possible before we head out. And know when to turn back. Ice climbs are a little bit hard, they're a little bit unicorn type climbs in the sense that, we don't have a ton of it here in the Northwest, but if the conditions are not right and you're putting yourself into risk, you got to just think about your sphere of acceptable risk. And I have 3 slides that really speak to the efficiency aspect of moving quickly. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I definitely encourage you to kind of go over. These are all just tips from past climb leaders on I've just asked them the question, how do you move fast through the mountains? And, here's sort of the feedback, that a lot of people have given. So a lot of great tips on here. Some of these, seem pretty straightforward. Other these, like the drafting by hooking the leader's picks, that's kind of a cool one, because if you think about efficiency of swing an ice tool and the energy you expend, you could get pretty tired over the course of the day. So if the leader is putting the picks, the pick placements, and you could actually just simply move your tool into the same hole that's already been made, you've saved yourself a bit of energy in order to move very fast. So I thought, that was kind of a cool one. Other efficiencies, again, just keeping Schul's, tarp, carrying a hex key, if tools get loosened up on you. That's never really, with some of the tools having demountable picks, being able to kind of tighten things in the field is pretty good. And this is the last slide with just more efficiency. But just, thinking about, if the leaders, like, if you could cut steps, do that rather than trying to set up a pitch, or or use your hands, just similar to rock climbing. So I'm going to move on to gear right now.
Hey, Ed had a question on efficiency. That's
Sure.
okay. So is it like quite common for example, in rock climbs grade 3 and 4, there are, class 4 sections where we unrope or, simul. So is there an equivalent in ice routes where you would not want to pitch out the entire thing for
Yes.
efficiency?
Yes. Yeah. So on the ice field trips, you're going to be shown how to swing leads, but then you're also going to be shown on how to simul climb. And and I think you're already kind of alluding to it, like if we're going into some areas that are going to be warming up and we want to move fast and the terrain is not very difficult, then here, yeah, we want to consider simul climbing.
Okay.
And it requires a little bit of trust, but I like to think that a lot of our rock skills are transferable to this. It's just that you're doing it with picks. I'm not being too cavalier about that, but what I'm trying to encourage you is that you've already been given a lot of the tools through your rock backgrounds, and I'm encouraging you to draw onto those, for this medium as well.
Cool. Thank you.
So I'm curious, what's a chicken clip?
Chicken clip would be if, let's say, you're leading a pitch and let's say your footholds are just awkward, because when you're pitching out a route, you may only have on a 60-meter rope, you may only have 3 ice screws between you and your belayer. So if you think about it, that's what, like, let's see, about like say 10 to 15 meters of rope. So if you think about the fall that could result if you were to slip, if you get into a position, you put a nice screw in, you clip your personal anchor to it, and stop, rest, whatever you need to do, but stay safe.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna talk about gear in terms of what's necessary and what's nice to have. So necessary gear, warm fitted clothing. Even though it's ice, even though we climb in the warmer temperatures, it's still ice, and we're at altitude usually. So having your warm clothing fitted, have that system dialed in, that's good. Sunscreen, glasses, climbing helmet, stiff mountaineering boots. This is something that you really want to pay attention to. You're not going to be able to front point or do some of the crampon techniques if you have any bend in your boots. And usually you'll learn this at the first field trip. I went through it myself, and when I found that I couldn't front point with my quote unquote stiff hiking boots, you really do need almost like the stiffest boots you could possibly get. And whether you get leather, plastic, or some hybrid, I mean, it seems like there's advantages and disadvantages to each of those. I mean, leather has a little bit longer of a break-in period, but it lasts quite a bit. Plastics, I mean, it's kind of being phased out, but it's very stiff, but it doesn't breathe really well. A lot of hybrid boots are coming online. I actually just got a pair myself to try out, but I haven't gone out onto the ice with them yet. They're Gore-Tex, fairly lightweight, but they're really, really kind of stiff. Some have a built-in gaiter, some don't. But the main thing I want to drive home is that your boots need to be as stiff as possible. Gaiters, think about the bottom of your pants. You don't want to capture a crampon point on those, so gaiters are like essential. And the rest of the other gear, you already have from your glacier or rock climbing. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools, and you're going to, you should probably look, the first thing I would do is each of you go and take a look at your general mountaineering axe. And for ice climbing, we want axes that are technically rated, because the general mountaineering axe in general will not stick ice really well. And how you find that out is whether there's a, you could see that there's the rating code that's on the pick, or it's on the handle, and it's either a B or it's a T. And we really want tools that speak to the T. And sometimes in the pick that's in the picture right here, it's, the pick is interchangeable with the shaft. So you could have the shaft rated as a B, but you could put a T pick into it. And that would be okay. You just want, you want that pick and all of those serrated edges to be rated for, you know, hooking into ice or hooking into rock, and really kind of strong enough for some of the moves that would be made. You think about Alpine ice as it's not like a matching set of 55 centimeter tools. If you think about it, like, you're going to have a glacier approach more often than not. So you're going to be taking your mountain axe in order to do the glacier travel. And then when you're on the route, unless you're willing to carry another 2 to 3 pounds for that second tool, for that third tool, you know, you want to think about, you know, the gear that you're bringing and the ability for it. I personally have a T-rated mountain axe, and then I have that's 65 centimeters, I think. And then I have a T-rated 55 centimeter technical second tool for the climb. So this way I'm able to only take 2 tools out rather than having 3 with me. But this would be one of the first things I would start to look at with assessing your current gear. And I would encourage you to bring your mountain axe, even if it's B rated, bring it to the first field trip, try sticking it into the ice, see if it sticks. And if not, then you'll know what it feels like if it doesn't stick. Or best case, it sticks, you know, well for you. I've personally found that, like, the Black Diamond Ravens don't really work. They kind of bounce out of the ice. But the Black Diamond Venoms, which, you know, they seem to stick fairly well. So anyway, we'll talk more about tools later, but look for those ratings. And I guess I'll kind of say this right now is, don't go out and buy a second tool right away until your first field trip. And I'll get to that in a second. The ice climbing hardware, you know, you want sharp 12-point crampons with front points. You want them compatible with your boots. No aluminum. Aluminum will not stick to ice. And I wouldn't, if you have aluminum crampons, I encourage you to bring them to the first field trip as a second pair and walk out on the ice and actually get a feel for why they're not appropriate. I would just to kind of know why. Don't take my word for it. Find out for yourself, but find out for yourself with a safe backup, I guess is what I'm saying. But you really do want steel crampons, 12 points preferably. The ice axe, you know, I was talking about how mountain axe, you want 60 plus centimeters, you know, something that is, you know, going to kind of do you well. I mean, obviously it varies for how tall you are, but, you know, something that you could cross glaciers with. And, you know, we just talked about sticking the ice. The second tool should be one with a hammer. And typically, something that's 55 centimeters is perfectly fine. I encourage everybody to either reach out, if you're in a mentor group, reach out to your mentors. If you have friends who are in the climbing program, reach out to them, see if they have a second tool before you go out and buy one. And the reason I suggest that is that everybody's swing is different. And if you buy an axe cold without being able to kind of stick it in the ice, first, you're kind of taking a risk. And so what we try to encourage in the first field trip is that if everybody kind of borrows a tool or has a second tool, bring it, try out other people's, what they've brought. And I think you will quickly find that, like, you know what, hey, I don't really like that Black Diamond Venom, but I really liked that, camp tool over there. Like, you could start to test out the tools before you're going to drop $200 on a second tool. So highly encourage you to do that for at least for the first field trip. And then by the second field trip, make your purchase with what you think is good, or continue to borrow, but try out a second tool as much as you can before you actually buy it. It's just, I don't know how else more to drive that home. Leashes, you want to keep your ice tools attached to you. So this is both the ice axe and your second tool. So, and there's a variety type of leashes, whether you have like a runner that you use for your mountain axe, and then you have it sized so that you can use it as a hand leash. Think about your system. The spinner cords are good for the second tool, but maybe aren't really good for your mountain axe because they're not rated for falls. So think about the versatility of the gear that you're bringing. Tool protection. This is about, like, some of the rubber as and pick protections for your axes, or either a bag or the point protection for your crampons. Something that keeps the sharp things sharp. Caps for your ice screws. You are going to need ice screws. This, I would also encourage you, if you could borrow, I would encourage you to do so. There's a bunch of different ice screws out on the market. Some are easier to place than others, and knowing which ones work best for you is an opportunity at the first Ice One field trip for to get acclimated. So, for example, well, I'll leave it at that. And you want a variety of lengths. For alpine ice, you're mostly in the 19 to 22 centimeters. When you start getting into smaller ice screws, they're more for water ice, where the waterfalls are not really that thick. They'll work, but think about it as a 22 centimeter ice screw will hold a Mack truck on an alpine ice route. A 19 will do just fine. But once you start getting smaller than 19, it just means that it's going to take less weight. Pickets, V-thread tool. I'll explain that in a little bit. And these are kind of optional items, but they're kind of nice to have. Tool holster, there's a variety of styles. The ones I really like on the market they look like a plastic carabiner, if you will, and they kind of loop into most hip belts, and they literally clip tools and ice screws and pickets onto your onto your harness or onto your pack. Load limiting protection. These are your screamers that, you know, maybe some of you have for rock routes. If you think about what they're used for, you basically, if you were to take a fall on a load limiting protection piece, it reduces the shock load to the anchor. And if you think about, you know, if you're using smaller screws, you know, maybe you put a load limiting protection on that to help mitigate maybe some of the loads that it might take. Helmet, visor, or goggles are sometimes good. More just ice is going to rain down on you when you're belaying your second, or belaying the leader, I should say. And, you know, it's nice, but, you know, sunglasses work well too. Waterproof gloves, or bring multiple pairs of gloves. Your gloves will get wet when they're ice climbing, and just, you know, being able to stay warm really helps. A quick draw, you know, is helpful. I'm going to share shortly why. Trekking poles, more just quickly to get across icy sections without having to break out your tools. A wrap ring that you might find for your rock routes, and some extra purlon. You know, 6 or 7 millimeter purlon does just well. I'll share with you in a second. And if you're doing routes, ice routes that maybe have some opportunities to place protection on the sidewalls of a couloir, for example, you know, pitons, if you're going early season, because there might be ice in some of those cracks, or, you know, if it's late enough in season, you may want to bring a couple cams, or maybe even some nuts. I'm just going to go over a little bit about tool and crampon maintenance, and this is really just about sharpening tools and crampons, and really the goal is that, you know, if your tools are sharp, everything performs better for you. And the first thing to really, you know, before you even go out, is just, if you have removable picks or on your axe, just make sure that everything is sharp, all the bolts are tightened up. And, you know, the sharper points just allow you to move across the ice a lot easier. And you do move more effortlessly with sharper tools. And can't drive home how sharp tools really are a good thing for you. So what do you need? You know, if you just get a mill bastard file, you know, there's a bunch of them that are on Amazon, or you could go to Home Depot or any hardware store. We'll have that. And again, we're going to be sharpening. The assumption is we're sharpening steel. And, you know, you really want to make these into the shape that you want. So, for example, if you've been out on glacier climbs and, you know, you've walked across enough rocks and those front points are just not as sharp anymore, you know, you really want to bring them back into the condition that they were originally done. Whatever you do, do not use a bench grinder. The wheel spins at a high rate of speed. It heats up the metal and it messes with the tempering, and it doesn't give you the control that the bastard file will actually provide to you. Plus, if you think about it, is you want to take as little metal off as possible, and the bench grinder really is just a little bit harder to control. You know, if you have an area where you want to clamp your tool, you know, think about where you're doing this. Obviously, you don't want to hurt your furniture or yourself. And, you know, you want to bring the cross section of whether it's the crampon or your pick back into the shape that it was when you first bought it. And, you know, you're just taking like smooth, even strokes. And again, this is all about removing metal. And so don't do this in your kitchen and then walk barefoot. You know, it's just a recipe for some some uncomfortable feet. If you need, you could probably buy a piece of metal and like metal plate, or just like 1/8 inch, bar or something in like Home Depot, or whatever. You could practice on that before you do your tools, if you need to. Obviously, the way to keep your things sharp is to not get them dull. Not always easy, but if you think about just when you're moving, with ice screws on your harness, whenever if you're not using them, put the caps on. If you're not using your second tool, park it onto your harness. Crampons, take them off. Like if you cross a long rock section, things like that go a long way to avoid having to do that. And here's a video about sharpening tools and crampons. Ice screws are hard. If you want to go down that route, there's certainly a video for it. I generally will send them back. Like all my screws are from Black Diamond, so I'll send them back to Black Diamond to get sharpened, just because it's the one thing I want surgically sharp, and I'm not gonna mess with my screws. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about anchors. And we have ice screws, which essentially are pieces of metal, and they make them out of titanium or steel. They do make aluminum ones, but they're not very, they're a little bit harder to drive. Essentially, the bottom part, these are ultra sharp razors, and essentially they're even angled at the bottom, so that as you turn the screw with the handle, they essentially almost like drill into the ice. And then, obviously you can see like sort of the screw threads, and then you would place them up to the carriage bolt. And, obviously I have different sizes that are here in the image for you. Pickets, whether you have Yates or the MSR Coyotes or any other manufacturer. I personally like the Yates because they rack really nicely. Pitons, these, I would probably not go out and buy these right away. I would, if you find yourself doing very particular routes or very remote routes, in the right conditions. So for example, sorry, I'm going to go back just to kind of show you. Like this route, this is El Dorado, Northwest Couloir. And you can see, we brought pitons on this route, and we were able to kind of, I think, put 2 or 3 pitons, as well as some rock nuts and cams. But it was the pitons, you could see what the route kind of gives you. And sometimes you see a crack, but it's filled with frozen ice, and being able to kind of drive into that ice, into the crack with a piton is nice. But I've really only used them on this route and maybe one other. So it's not really a common thing. Like you wouldn't be expected to have it for the ice field trips. Belay anchor, similar to some of your rock climbing. We want to place 3 ice screws, and we want them staggered from one another. And essentially we're going to equalize a cordelette, tie it off, and then you're going to belay your follower off of the anchor that you would have here. And obviously missing from here is you'd be PA'd into one of the ice screws as well. But this is the anchor setup that you would be expected to place at ice 1, and you will be expected to do it for the second field trip. There's also other anchors, and they all come up in different situation. So this is a what's commonly called a V thread, and essentially it's a piece of purlon that you've taken an ice screw and you've made a V into the ice, and you've threaded through a piece of purlon, and you're essentially using the ice as a anchor, and with an ice screw backup, until the last person goes. Then the last person to pull the ice screw, unclip here, repel the route, and then the only thing you're leaving behind is the purlon. Pretty darn handy to have in a pinch if you're bailing. There's also ice bollards, similar to the snow bollards. You're gonna take your as and you're gonna carve out, kind of like the same bulb shape with an undercut on the bottom. You'd throw your runner in there with a clip, and then you could rappel off of that. Again, you're not leaving any gear behind. And like the V thread anchor, you could put in a ice screw backup, and that could be pulled as the last person leaves. And how do you make a V thread anchor? Just kind of illustrate. This is all in Freedom. But essentially, you're going to drive the ice screw in, and it's best if you do a 22 centimeter ice screw. So essentially, what you're doing is you're putting it on an angle, not only into the face of the ice, but you're also doing it in the lateral dimension as well. And you can see is like between 6 to 8 inches is where you're going to have each point, and you want the two cores to connect. And then when you put your purlon, you snake it in here. This is your V thread tool, and essentially it's just, think of it as like a coat hook with a little sharp end. You're just able to kind of stick it in, grab the purlon, and then pull it out, and then you tie your double fisherman's end. And this will last as long as until the sun starts to hit it. And then at that point, obviously the ice melts and starts to weaken the anchor. But this is a very good bail option. This is one type of V thread. I think when we do the gear demo, the better kind is like that. This is actually there's a, I think it's made by Gravel. They have this piece as a retractable within a plastic enclosure, because it's really tough having this device sitting in your pack, and because it just catches on things, because that end, this end is kind of sharp. Likewise, you could take a coat hanger, from a dry cleaner or whatever, and make one yourself and save yourself the $15 or whatever. Another type of anchor is you're going to be asked to set up some top ropes as we start doing some of the practicing. So this is really the mechanics of setting up the top rope. It's almost no different than what you're doing for rock, except you want the ice screws to be staggered, and locking carabiners. We kind of do that for our top ropes. But you want to put snow over top of these ice screws. And obviously it's not on the photo, but the reason we do that is that as generally you're going to be putting your top rope into areas that are going to eventually melt out. And it's not uncommon for these ice screws after an hour to actually kind of rattle around in the hole. So putting the snow on top just shields it from the sun ray, from the ultraviolet rays, which are going to inevitably heat up, and basically it helps keep the top rope anchor without you having to reset another top rope after an hour, for example. Let's talk about climbing technique a little bit, and I'm not going to go through the technique in depth. I think you're going to be, I would encourage you to read up. All the pictures I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides are all from Freedom. So take a look at the various techniques, and you're going to be going over them, on the first field trip, but just, the first, this is all stuff that we kind of learned in our basic, course, just the stake position, walking in balance, so it's expected that you're going to be able to do that. But then as slopes start to get more steeper, there's other ways that we could start to use our axes and crampon foot techniques to ascend slopes without having to pull out all the ropes and hardware gear. So think of these techniques as, hey, we could climb 35-degree ice, safely without having to rope up. Think about that speed as safety aspect that we were talking about earlier. So I'm going to just make a point, no pun intended, about front pointing, because this is really the inclination for everybody is to try and front point. It just burns your calves. And not only that, but it also, there's just a lot of sloppy technique. And even in this image, you could see that the crampon being used, is either a hinged or a semi-hinged crampon, which is just not stiff. And you're just not able to get that platform. So think of the crampons that you're going to use and the boots as you're basically when your front points are into the ice, you're essentially making a mobile platform for you to stand on. And this is really kind of what you want. This is quite common, and don't take it personally at the field trip when people are going to be pointing out that you're dropping your heels too much, because it is a bit of work, but just strive to do what's down the bottom. Don't do that. Other ice axe positions, just high dagger, low dagger. Again, it's like all about how you're using your axe to climb even steeper slopes without having to pull out all of that gear if it's safe. And these are techniques that are transferable to, snow or maybe some short sections. It really does, these things really do increase your speed. Looking at different ways to, when your points are all in the ice, this is a less stressful foot position compared to the front point. So there's a way, this technique actually allows you to alternate front point to more of like a full French to the ice. And how to use your two tools pretty effectively. And conceivably, if you think about like climbs like Lane Peak or steep snow climbs, and conceivably in the right conditions, you could have two tools, use these techniques and not even rope up and just zip right up the route. So good tools to have in your toolbox. Descending, we always want to face out. It just puts us in better control, and it allows us to have our footwork in the right way. Think about your plunge stepping, and it's coming down ice is very similar. Obviously, you're not digging your heels in, but you're basically Frenching with your crampons as you descend instead of the full heels. Nice picture of Observation Rock. Let's talk a little bit about just thinking about before the ice climbs, and just a little bit of the preparation and things to think about for each of you. Know your route. Whenever your climb day is, you want to pay attention to the weather history, the forecast, avalanche forecast, obviously. Again, that you want nice, clear, cold weather for when you're actually going to be out on the ice. Think about your team composition, your party size. As a leader, I generally will not do ice climbs with a greater party size than 4. I just find that smaller teams move faster, they're more efficient, and I think you also minimize the amount of ice fall that you kind of send down on some other parties. Other climb leaders will climb with maybe 6, but it's going to be really rare you'll find an ice climb with a party size greater than 6. Obviously you want to spruce up sharpen your points. You're going to establish a climbing plan, with your climb leader, with your friends, however you're going to go out. And then while you're on the route, think about just like we're going out in winter, and like think about like all those airy tools, again, all transferable. Like think about the route and the weather. Did you show up, and is it what you expected? Is it, if it's colder, great. If it's warmer, it's a piece of information for you to think about. But you really do want to make a go, no go decision before you start on the ice route. And, because if the conditions are not what you have expected, and you end up going slower, the potential for those other objective hazards just increase with this particular medium. And it's not like you could simply walk off some of these routes. The use of proper footwork, climbing in balance, move efficiently when you can. You want to use proper tool work. Again, this is something we'll go over in the field trip. You want to be efficient you don't want to overswing your axe because you will get tired, with it. And if you start getting fatigued, then you're going to go slower. And then once you go slower, you just open yourself up to changing conditions. Keep tools away as conditions permit. And then, obviously with like any other glacier climb, be careful of what's around you. And here's where you're kind of making those decisions like, okay, is this terrain enough, low angle enough where we could simulclimb it? Do we need to rope up for it? Or, when you start getting to some pitches where there's maybe some objective hazards below, okay, making the decision to swing leads. And this is all something you just need to assess, once you're out there. I mean, we have the benefit of, a lot of climbers here in Washington, and a lot of trip reports and condition reports. But if you start going into some of these ice climbs that are in maybe a little bit more remote conditions, or maybe they're not commonly done, then information becomes a little bit less, and you're just going to have to make, a judgment. But if there's one thing I'm going to leave with you, it's going to be make informed decisions while you're on the ice route. And unlike a glacier climb or a rock climb, the medium is going to change. If it warms up, it changes. It could completely change the ice conditions and really make things pretty bad for you. Or best case, it's colder that night than expected, in which case, you guys have a great time. So that's everything I have for you. Again, a lot of information. I definitely encourage you to kind of go back over a couple of those things. Any general overarching questions from anybody, or specific questions?
Do you know if there will be any trips this coming season to Colorado or Montana?
Probably, but I think that would probably be more for the water ice.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know if people go out there and try to get laps or not.
Yeah, generally there's usually a contingent that goes out in January to Ouray. And December, I think, has the Bozeman Ice Festival, like in early December. Um, it may or may not be formally organized with the Mountaineers, but there's a lot of people within the organization that do go. So the people who are interested in this medium are it's a specialized medium, and I think getting involved with, or asking Paul, myself, like if you want connections to people, we can help you out. But ice climbing is it's a great thing, but it's also a little challenging in the Northwest, just given some of the climatic conditions that are changing. But for water ice, it's mostly like in the winter. There's usually like a water ice play day, or even sometimes there's some instruction. I don't know whether that's going to happen this year or not, but in the fall, there's usually some water ice course, so that it's a nice bridge from Alpine ice into the water ice. Any other questions?
And we don't need to have tools for the foam wall practice?
No. So for the foam wall, it's essentially like a 3 to 4 inch thick piece of specialized foam that's stuck to various surfaces in the program center. And there's a special set of tools with non-serrated picks that you will be asked to use. It still sticks and swings as you would expect, but the serrated edges would just tear the foam wall. So there will be tools for the foam wall practice sessions available for you. So you don't have to just bring your harnesses, beaners, crampons, but don't worry about the ice tools.
Got it. Thank you.
A little bit orthogonal to that. Do you have any thoughts on the wooden tools? I know sometimes people use those to get laps in at indoor climbing gyms.
They're pretty nice. I mean, I think Paul Brown is a big proponent of them, and I've tried them out, and they're pretty darn nice. They're nice and lightweight. I mean, it's obviously less about swinging and more about hooking and getting, that upper body strength. But I think, if you have access to them, or if you're interested in them, they're a great training tool.
Hi, Ed. I got a question for you. What is your favorite alpine ice climb?
My favorite alpine ice climb, I would say it's tied between Liberty Ridge on Mount Rainier and the Northwest Couloir on El Dorado. I think for different reasons. Liberty Ridge was just a challenge, and it was a pretty special climb. It's pretty dangerous, but it was a very cool climb if you are aware of everything and the conditions are right. The Northwest Couloir in El Dorado was fantastic. It had great ice. It had areas to put Rock Pro in, and we used screws, we used pickets, we used pitons, we used Rock Pro, and it was just a lot of fun and good time. Not many climbs go out to that area, but if you ever see that climb, I would definitely jump on that one. Couts
Sounds
Glacier.
good. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
I'll say Couts Glacier is nice as well. The penitentes are really pretty fantastic. It's just an unusual ice feature. that we don't really see.
Thank you. Got to put it on my list.
Mhm. So I'm just looking at the chat window, so I'm not really, I see that there are some questions in there. Maybe not. Lindsay, do you still need me to clarify the clarity versus opaque?
I think it would help my brain.
Okay. So let me pull that screen back up. Let me see if I could, I don't know if I have maybe pictures of it, but sorry, I'm gonna. Maybe not. Sorry, I thought I might have some photos, but if you think about like the opaqueness, so if you were to look at, think about like how white is it? I think is maybe a good way, you know, compared to clarity, which is about how clear it is. And so you could have clear ice, so black ice that has all of the rocks and stuff, you could see through it. Like, I mean, it's a very hard, compacted area, but it's just, it has that black look to it because it's mixed in. It has like sand and dirt and, you know, rocks mixed into it. So, and you see that through the clear medium. Whereas the blue ice, you know, if you think about when you're looking at the walls in a glacier or you're scraping away some of the snow that might be on a glacier, you know, you kind of get like almost that classic ice cube where you could see right through it. And the further you could see into it, like the you know, the more pure, for lack of better words, it is. You know, and both of those really speak to how hard that ice is. And if you, so let's say that, and the opaque ice is maybe more ice that is transitioning from snow to ice. And, you know, maybe sometimes it's not all the air is fully worked out. And that's what actually kind of gives that white color to it. And I think when you're at the Baker Seracs, you know, you're going to see it because it's going to be warm out, you know, the sun's going to be on it. And when you put a tool into it, you'll actually start to associate like, oh, that color, white, opaque, not to keep using that word, but, you know, look and feel to the ice, you know, wow, my point really sticks well into that. Or, and then when it warms up a little bit, it's going to get more white. And then it's just going to fall off because it's almost like melting away. So think of it like clear is hard. The more white it is, it's soft, would be maybe a good way and to think about it. And the color really speaks to the quality of whether you have a hard ice that's free of debris or not.
And I have a question about anchors, or rather like belay anchors, because So you said that we want to be using 3 screws, but I also often see people use 2 screws. And I just kind of, what wisdom can you share on how many screws you need for an anchor, and how do you know you have enough?
So the current course teaching is to go back to the 3-point anchor. And let me pull up that diagram one more time. So this is the official Mountaineers way of doing this. What has been taught in past years is, in lieu of this 3rd screw, is to go off of the 2 screws. So I would say, and that change was made, say, 3 to 4 years ago. And it's not that it's, the 3 points of contact is more safe, if you will. And can you get away with 2 if that's all you have placement for? I mean, in this image, I mean, there's plenty of spots to put the screw. Sometimes you may not have that opportunity. And, you know, think about it like, you know, just like rock climbing, or, you know, sometimes you may have to improvise, right? And there may be situations where maybe the ice is lower angle enough, and maybe you could get away with 2, you know, if the objective hazard is not terribly bad. But 3 is sort of the safest, best practice, if you will.
Okay, so was there something that happened, or something that people realized to make that change? Because it's yeah, and I'm just curious, you know, did somebody's 2-point anchor fail, or did somebody do some testing? Because then now you have to bring even more ice screws.
Yeah, I honestly don't know, but I do know that a lot of our more recent changes in the past couple of years has been to align with standard or common best practices that guides or other instructional agencies might be using. So this is
Yeah,
not,
that makes sense.
yeah. So this is not an uncommon way, and actually, I mean, this setup is not terribly bad either, because, and I'm kind of getting ahead, you know, but if you put your first ice screw in and you PA off of this one, and then you set up your anchor, I mean, now you have, you know, like a nice, good, safe setup for your second. And, you know, you flip your reverso, and then, you know, your second becomes the new leader. When they make a station, you're able to really take apart this whole anchor and leave 1 screw in as your PA. So you're still anchored to the mountain. You could essentially, while they're building their anchor, you could be taking off this whole section. And so and even in a 2 ice screw scenario, you would still be leaving 1 screw in. So I don't know. I don't think it's that, you know, it's just a little bit safer, particularly on the more vertical slopes that you might be on. Okay.
Ed,
Yes.
Ed, in one of the slides, there was a point about carrying quick draws. Was there any? I mean, was there something about quick draws that you wanted to come back to later?
Sure. So the quick draw is handy. I'm going to actually use in this image. So in this scenario,
You can't see the slides anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. Damn it. Where is this? Oh, I didn't hit the share button. Sorry. So in the 3-point anchor, I mean, obviously you're going to be belaying so let's say you're the lead climber and you've just placed this anchor in, you're going to be belaying your second off of this. They've come up, they've PA'd into one of the ice screws. You've transferred any remaining gear. You've taken your reverso out. You now have it on your harness. You could put the quick draw over into this screw. And so that the rope goes from your belay device that's on your person through the quick draw and then out to your new lead climber. And what that does is it acts as a redirect. And so let's say the new leader walks above the screw, and let's say they take a fall. What they're essentially, when the rope goes tight, it's not going to pull on you, which then pulls on this system. You're essentially redirecting most of that energy to the quick draw back, and it's going to pull you into the ice rather than pulling you down the mountain. Because footing is on, you're probably going to be on a platform that you've cut out, or maybe you're in a good safe space and you don't really want to move. The quick draw just adds a nice directional without having to say fully extend the runner, or your lead climber goes up 8 to 10 feet above the screw weight and puts another screw in with a runner. I mean, that's another way to do it, but you've placed a piece of gear that in some situations you didn't need to place. The quick draw really helps keep you, very much just like rock climbing. You want to stay stable, and if there is a fall, you as a belayer want to be pulled into the mountain and retain that standing position. And so that's one way to use the quick draw.
Cool. Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that, if everybody just stays put, I'm going to do snapshot of all the attendees, and I have everybody's email address in the chat window.
Oh, I missed that instruction.
I'm sorry.
I thought you said names. I missed it.
Or email if you're not registered for the course in 2021.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, then have your email in there. Cool. Well, hopefully this has been helpful for you, and feel free to reach out to Paul, myself, if you have any other questions. I'll PDF these slides this evening and email them around to this group. And I think they'll probably also go on the ice climbing Google Drive, and as well as a copy of this recording. And I think maybe Paul might send out the link to that. So, but yeah, reach out if you have any questions. Sign up for some of the field trips. Definitely consider the foam wall for practice. And yeah, we'll be in touch, once we get settled on when best to do the gear night. So, but good luck. I mean, for as much as hopefully I didn't scare everybody with how dangerous this is, it's something to be careful about. But it's also probably one of the more rewarding aspects of some of your climbing too. So there's some really great terrain and opportunities that open up with these skills. And so good luck to everybody, and and I hope you enjoy it as much as we all do. So.
Thank you, Ed. This was great.
Cool. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.